Welcome to Off the Scale, the podcast where we dive deep into the journeys of the world's top short-term rental property managers. Join us as we uncover their secrets to scaling success, from pivotal milestones to the lessons learned through mistakes and triumphs. Hosted by Scale family members Damien Sheridan, Gianpaolo Vieiro, and Louise Brace. Off the Scale reveals what drives these leaders each day and the indispensable tools that propelled them to the top. Tune in for inspiring stories, actionable insights, and the ultimate blueprint for scaling your own short-term rental business.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Off the Scale podcast, in which we interview the leading short-term rental property managers from around the world. My name is Louise Brace, and today I'm delighted to introduce Mark Winship from Gateway Accommodation. Now, Mark took to the stage at Scale Barcelona this year and delivered, in my opinion, a totally unique session on how he built an award-winning and eight-figure property business. Together with his wife, Caroline, Mark also hosts not one, but two successful podcasts, Secret Service podcast and the Net Gain Club podcast. So no pressure on me today at all. Welcome, Mark. It's great to have you here today.
Hi, Louise. Thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to getting into this.
Yeah, so the idea is to really kind of talk through your journey when you've been scaling kind of from zero to the portfolio and the eight-figure business that you have today. So why don't we start by just getting a little bit of an introduction to Gateway Accommodation. Where in the world are you, your portfolio figures and kind of typical guests?
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny hosting my own podcast. I feel much more comfortable being on the other side of the mic than having people ask me questions. But let's get into it. So yeah, a little bit of background. So Gateway Accommodation is our main company, if you like. We have a few offshoots as well, a few things that I'm sure we'll end up talking about where we've kind of diversified a little bit as well. But we are technically top to tail in the UK, quite literally, from the Shetland Islands in the north of, beyond the north of Scotland to the south coast, the very south coast tip of England. So we are spread all over.
Of the UK.
Absolutely, yeah. We started in the short stay space at the end of 2018, and Gateway Accommodation is kind of our main core company, and that largely focuses around working stays, particularly around the East Midlands, where we're based around East Midlands Airport, but also down in Southampton and in Yeovil in Somerset. So we've got a few sort of key locations located around big industry, big employers, regional airports, big hospitals, that kind of thing.
Amazing. And so basically you started back in 2000. So what were your initial ambitions when you started out? What kind of was the history behind starting out in short-term rentals?
Yeah, so we launched Gateway Accommodation really right at the very end of 2018. I think our first units came online at the beginning of 2019. We'd actually been investing in property for a couple of years before that. So we started out investing in HMOs in the northwest of England and in the Midlands. And our move into the short stay rental space was kind of in conjunction with a commercial to residential project that we stumbled upon, that we were aware of short stay rentals, or Airbnbs as we knew them at the time. We had a friend who was doing really good stuff over in a nearby city, and that got us to start to think about the market for serviced accommodation within that area where the project lies in the East Midlands, and that became our sort of primary strategy for that development. In the meantime, we took on a couple of rent-to-rent deals just to sort of test that market, just to see if there was the demand that we kind of thought there was from our research, and the indicators were pretty good. So I had actually quit my job as a tennis coach through the income generated through our other property ventures. So that allowed us to focus on a more hands-on strategy like serviced accommodation. I've always been involved in business. I've always had that sort of entrepreneurial streak, I guess. So short stay rentals kind of appealed on that front. So that was our first foray, actually. We threw ourselves into the deep end with a big commercial to residential development to 6 apartments in the Midlands.
And so would you say that you took a lot of serviced accommodation over short-term rentals? That's what I'm hearing. So would you say your typical guests are more kind of the business guest, the contractor, as opposed to leisure guests?
They certainly are within Gateway Accommodation. As I said, we've branched out into the leisure market. So we now have a separate company that we manage properties on behalf of other landlords, but we've also got a few leisure properties that come under that banner ourselves. That's almost come under a separate brand, if you like. But Gateway Accommodation's core focus is absolutely, it's around, I would say, white collar rather than blue collar, so kind of corporate. We tend to be located close to regional airports, so pilots, air crew, but all of the infrastructure that goes into supporting, you know, airports, the big Amazon warehouse sheds and all of that sort of stuff that tends to spring up around these kind of things as well.
Amazing.
So that's a big core focus for us, but we've also got a leisure arm as well that has grown up more recently.
So you've got some serious diversification, and that's something that, you know, I loved your scale session. So it has been a lot about horizontal as well as vertical scaling for you. Can you talk a little bit more about that diversification?
Yeah, absolutely. Because we've not,
why you decided to diversify so much?
Because we've probably not followed if there is a traditional route at all, then we've probably not followed that traditional route. I know a lot of people will start out building a portfolio of rent-to-rents or management properties where it's solely an income focus, and then once they've develop that to a point, they might start looking at buying properties, renovating properties, developments, that sort of thing. Whereas we've really done that from the outset. So what we were quite interested in is, are we able to combine our property development experience that we took from the HMO world, using service accommodation or even holiday lets at the back end as a high cash flowing strategy for our buy and hold element to it, and really create that sweet spot of equity growth, the opportunity to recycle cash from refinancing properties onto commercial valuations, and then renting them out, booking them out as serviced accommodation. So we kind of started that from day one, and we've built and it's become a little bit of an experiment, really, in terms of how far can you push that model. We pretty quickly, with that first project, funnily enough, we pretty quickly realized that there were significant operational efficiencies, financial efficiencies in running multi-unit blocks. So the fact that we developed those properties out from their previous commercial usage into residential apartments, but then we refinance onto a commercial valuation based on the income that the serviced accommodation business was going to generate or was generating. That allowed us to recycle a lot of that initial investment and move it onto another deal, whilst at the same time we've now got, let's say, a block of 6 apartments or 8 apartments where the operational efficiencies are great because your cleaners are all going to one place, all your problems happen in one place, all your maintenance issues are all in the same place. You can build a team around it. You're not scattered all over the place. Your mortgage is spread over 6 or 7 or 8 individual units that are still priced just as if they were, you know, units in isolation on the market. No one necessarily knows they're renting an apartment on Airbnb that's part of a block. It rents at the same price, but your mortgage costs, your insurance, all of your fixed kind of property costs are spread over all of those units, and it brings down that break-even point where individual units, when we started with the first couple of rent-to-rents that we took on, we were looking at a sort of 50% break-even point in terms of occupancy. You know, our multi-unit blocks can be as low as 35% occupancy for where we start to become profitable. And then we really started to stretch the elastic and say, well, okay, what about, how can we take that to its full extent and look at apart hotels, which is something I'm sure we'll go on to talk about. But that's been the sort of biggest shift for us in terms of scaling our portfolio.
That's amazing. I mean, it kind of makes total sense. It's like you have pushed boundaries and you have experimented, but with something that, it makes total sense to do that, to keep everything in one place. As I said, that was, for me, a real standout session when you talked about the way that you've scaled horizontally with your business. So let's talk about exciting things. Talk about the kind of your first big win as a company when you were starting to scale the business?
I think our first big win, in a sense, was that realization that that these developments would qualify for commercial valuations. So when we did 2 projects similar to the one I mentioned, 2 multi-unit block developments that then refinanced onto a commercial valuation based on both the income track record, but also our track record trading within the industry.
Yeah.
And we suddenly realized that there was a real opportunity here, not only to build a high cash flowing business, but also to really scale an asset base and create some generational wealth, I guess.
Yeah.
And then COVID obviously hit.
Yes.
which
A year after you started.
Yeah, a year after we started, and that threw a few things into turmoil. But you know what? That was probably our most, I don't know if aggressive is the right word, but our most aggressive period in terms of buying up assets. And that's when I think we really started to zero in on apart hotels as the next step in that strategy. We bought our first hotel during the COVID lock, or just after actually the COVID lock, the full COVID lockdown, but still very much within the pandemic period. And what we realized was that there was already, but COVID had kind of accelerated this, a market where there were tired, run-down guest houses and bed and breakfast properties that were being run as lifestyle businesses where the owners lived on site. You know, and we all know, we've all stayed in them, you know, the owner will pot around making your breakfast. You've got to let them know what time you're going to be down in the morning and all this kind of stuff. And we kind of realized that through the service accommodation business we've been building, that there was another way of doing this, that remotely operating properties like this was not only possible through systems that we'd been building, but also was desirable to big sectors of the market who just wanted to be able to check in, who wanted to have access to self-catering facilities for potential longer stays, access to laundry facilities, etc. So we really started to realize there was an opportunity where big chunks of these buildings were currently taken up by non-income generating activities like the owner's accommodation, the room where breakfast was served, the guest lounge. None of this was generating income.
Yeah.
And we realized that if we can come in, absolutely, if we can come in and we can renovate the property to really high modern standards, install self-catering kitchenette facilities, install laundry facilities, but most importantly, convert those ancillary spaces into more lettable accommodation. What that did was not only did it create the opportunity for a lot more cash flow, but also it meant that the end valuation, the commercial valuation on that property was significantly higher, and it was almost creating equity out of nowhere. And this has really been the model we've kind of fixed on ever since. We're now operating 4 apart hotels, 2 of which we own, 2 of which are under management. And it's just a phenomenal opportunity to scale and build an asset base at the same time.
Amazing. So we talk about wins. Would you say what was the milestone in that journey, or kind of the light bulb moment when you said, this is really, we're doing something right here, and something kind of completely different or off the scale even?
Yeah, it's 2 sides to the coin. I mean, I remember when we hadn't even opened the property yet. So our first apart hotel's in Southampton on the south coast. It's called the Madison. We hadn't even opened the doors. Just as a bit of an afterthought, bit of throwaway marketing, we'll get a couple of articles in the local press. We went old school, and we got the newspapers out, and there was an article out there about the property and with photos and everything else. And within 24 hours of that article going out, we had a lady get in touch with us who was the CEO of a plastics company who basically are the biggest supplier to the aerospace industry in the UK. Not a company we'd ever heard of. We wouldn't have known about them otherwise. And she immediately, I mean, they were booking rooms above a local pub for when I think they were from Italy, they're Italy and France, their workers were coming over. So she came over for a bit of a tour of the property, and literally at the end of the tour, she'd already booked 2 apartments for 6 months, and basically had the others on almost like a rolling, we'll let you know when we have requirements. And so that was that because you do developments like this and you can do all the research in the world, but until somebody actually signs on the dotted line and you've got proof that that demand does exist and it's real and you've got money in the bank, and that was a big light bulb moment. But I think it's that combined with the fact that the numbers are so compelling. So we bought this property for 830,000. We did just shy of £500,000 worth of work to develop it out in all the ways that I've just explained. We use none of our own money to do that. We work with private investors and we work with development finance. And at the back end, and this is almost day one refinance, so this isn't running it for 3 years. This was using the credibility and the track record we'd got as a business already in the industry. It refinanced for 2.1 million, which meant that pretty much all of that initial investment came back to us again. We'd created a good chunk of equity in the property that we now own, using none of our own money. And on the back end, we had income coming in. We were doing sort of 45, 50,000 pound months in terms of income. So the numbers are so compelling, and you know, it's probably no wonder that once you've gone apart hotels, it's hard to go back.
I can imagine. Okay, so on the flip side then, Mark, give us an idea of perhaps a mistake or some of the mistakes that you made along the way during your scaling journey.
I mean, we've made so many mistakes. Yeah, I mean, that's what our podcast's all about, actually, is just lifting the lid on the mistakes we make pretty much on a daily basis. But I think we all do in such a fluid and dynamic industry. I would say the biggest mistake that springs to mind is the over-reliance that we created, inadvertently, I would say, but the over-reliance on the online travel agents, particularly actually within the payment processing. So you're probably aware, most operators were aware, there was a big scandal last summer in 2023 with Booking.com, who just stopped paying hosts. You know, cards on the table, we very nearly lost our business over it last summer. All told, over the span of a few months, they owed us about £100,000. This was really scary stuff. With no communication, no comeback, and I think the learnings from that, we got through it. Although we're still recovering from it, I would say we're still definitely pulling out of that dive that we had, but it was pretty scary for a while, and you felt pretty helpless, and that's the point. I think that we learnt that now more than ever. If we hadn't learnt the first time through COVID, we should have learnt off the back of that we've got to start taking control of our own payment process, building our direct booking database, reducing our reliance on the online travel agents, which we all know, and to a certain extent we all pay lip service to, but that's an absolute, it's an absolute huge focus for us at the moment because of the experiences we've had. And that was a big mistake that if I had my time again, you know, we wouldn't allow. I know with Airbnb you don't have a choice, but with other channels we try to retain as much control over the business and the finance as we can.
And so use them as a support rather than kind of a reliance, you know, that have other channels. And obviously, I guess, you know, with kind of the contract and business market, a lot of what you're doing is kind of direct with the HR resources and, you know, directors of companies. So, okay, so OTAs, no. What are some of perhaps, or a tool, or, you know, one of the tools or software that you've used that you couldn't do without in your scaling journey?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll start with our channel manager. So we use Hostaway, which we've actually only fairly recently migrated to, and it's I think, you know, we were fairly early adopters of channel managers that tried to be an all-in-one solution, but really it was a little bit clunky, and it was stuff that had just been bolted together as sort of new opportunities had come to the market. Whereas at the moment, Hostaway is a really good all-in-one solution for our team, because we've got a team of VAs now that kind of run the day-to-day of the business, and it's created a lot of operational efficiencies that save, if not a huge amount of money, but certainly time and therefore money, in terms of switching from different platforms and jumping between different software that does different things, to have it all in one place. has made us much more efficient. Price Labs is another one. I know most people will be familiar with that, but a lot of our strategy and our success revolves around really making sure we're always hitting that sweet spot of what the best guests are prepared to pay, and Price Labs is fundamental to that. That, you know, we wouldn't be where we are now with a set and forget strategy. So this has all been about it's a pretty fluid market, so being able to tap into that is key. And then it's more on a personal level. So obviously we run a relatively small team, so we're operating 65 units at the moment. We're spread geographically, as I said, all over the UK. We only have 4 members of staff that run that entire operation. So coordinating all of that is obviously a challenge. I use a piece of software called Motion, which is I guess task management and scheduling software, but it's an AI powered piece of software that keeps me on track and makes sure that I'm spending the time I need to on the high value tasks within the business, and then I'm not getting, if I just operated off a to-do list, I would never even get halfway up it. And inevitably all the important stuff will just keep getting bumped.
Yeah.
Whereas the AI tool
to look at afterwards.
Yeah, the AI tool, it keeps me accountable because basically I set tasks, I tell it what level of priority they are, what business they're for, and it will slot them automatically into my diary, but it won't bump other tasks. It will move it into another slot in the week if I don't get round to doing it, and it just keeps me on track and prioritized, which is good.
That sounds, well, an indispensable tool, definitely. Yeah. Especially when you're kind of a procrastinator, as I am. So talking about kind of the future, what are your goals? What are your plans for the next kind of few years? What have you got coming up?
Well, I mentioned that we've got a big hairy goal within our business to achieve 65% direct bookings across the board. So that is a huge focus for us, is to build that that customer base, that loyal customer base, repeat bookings, etc. But not just to reduce reliance on the online travel agents. This is all part of a bigger picture for us, which is now about increasing the business value. Mm-hmm. So we've got our mind on the end game, whatever that might be. And how can we increase the value of our business? Now, we've been doing that over the last few years by adding assets and growing that side of it. But we really want to spend a bit of time consolidating and looking at the value in our database. So making sure that we've got that direct booking database, because that is going to be worth a lot more at the back end should we ever decide, let's say, to move the company on or whatever it is. It's going to be worth a lot more if we've got a direct booking database that is significant, rather than we're 100% reliant on someone else's shop windows. We're also putting quite a lot of work into accreditations, so we're partway through the quality and tourism accreditation at the moment, which is a big process. It's an in-depth process, but our belief is that having that badge, having that kite mark at the end of it, is going to add significant value to the business. And then just general profitability, looking at where we can save costs, how we can increase income. So yeah, that's our focus at the moment, I think, is around adding value to the business as a whole.
Yeah, amazing. Well, let's talk this time next year and see what you've achieved.
Absolutely. Yeah,
I'll hold you accountable to all of those things. Amazing, Mark. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me today. A really incredible scaling journey. And I love the fact that, you talk about the fact, and it's true that, you kind of like shied away from traditional and really went experimental, and it's worked for you. How can people contact you if they want to get in touch?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, a good way to hear from us every week is via our podcast. So the Secret Service podcast, that's where Caroline and I quite literally lift the lid on our service accommodation business, our hospitality business, and we lay it bare. We laugh, cry, shout, everything that I'm sure everyone listening to this will be able to relate to. We talk about problem guests, issues we're having with landlords, maintenance issues. We cover it all. We don't hold anything back. So that's a good place to start. That's wherever you get your podcasts. It's the Secret Service podcast. And then I'm on Instagram at coaching.winners. So you can follow me on there. And I think they're probably the best places.
Amazing. Thank you, Mark. Thank you, listeners. Once again, you're listening to the Off the Scale podcast, and we'll see you in the next episode.